Being born in the prehistoric era meant your crib was a cave floor. Your first blanket, animal skin soaked in blood and rain. Forget toys, you played with rocks, sticks, and danger. A scratch could kill you from infection. Fire wasn't a luxury, it was life or death. You were always cold, wet, or burned. If you didn't die of hunger, something probably ate you. Saber-toothed cats lurked in the shadows. You couldn't run fast, but you had to try. Humans weren't at the top of the food chain. You didn't know what the sun was, but you feared the dark. Every night, the howling made you wonder if it was your last. The tribe was your only hope, but they could leave you behind if you slowed them down. There was no medicine, no sympathy, just survival. Babies were born into pain and silence. Mothers died in childbirth as a common ending. If you made it past childhood, you were lucky. Childhood ended the moment you could walk. Your job, hunt, gather, or be a burden. A wrong mushroom could end your story. Food was unpredictable, and starvation was normal. If you ate something bad, you died without understanding why. Thirst led people to drink poisoned water. You didn't know what disease was, but it knew you. Every cough might be the last breath. No one knew your name outside your tribe. Life was short, brutal, and anonymous. You carved stories into stone to be remembered, but most carvings faded into dust. You feared the sky, the stars, the thunder. Storms meant gods were angry, or you didn't understand the seasons, only that they killed you. You didn't farm, you followed the food. Migration was endless, exhausting, and dangerous. You walked miles just to eat roots. Wild berries could save or poison you. A broken leg was a death sentence. Your tools were stones sharpened by trial and blood. You learned pain before you learned words. Death wasn't feared, it was familiar. You slept lightly, ears tuned to danger. Some nights fire was your only family. You believed in spirits because you had no science. Rainbows were omens, not beauty. A simple fever was a terrifying mystery. Your skin cracked in the cold and blistered in heat. Clothing was stitched with bones and sinew. You shared your kill or faced exile. Exile meant certain deaths. Animals weren't food, they were threats. You tracked them before they tracked you. You didn't bathe, you hoped rain would. You hunted naked in the snow. Fire wasn't guaranteed, it was earned. If your spark died, so did you. Teeth fell out young and never came back. You didn't smile much anyway. Laughter was rare, it wasted breath. Sleep was dangerous. Dreams were disturbing. Some tribes sacrificed a week. The concept of love barely existed, it was replaced by survival. Language was born in desperation. You learned to grunt before you learned to hope. Some people never saw the sun again after entering a cave. You told stories to remember who died. Time wasn't measured, it was endured. You didn't know history was being made, you just wanted to live. Every birth was a gamble. Every meal was a miracle. Every day was a battle. You never rested, you recovered. You saw death in your mother's eyes. You buried your siblings in silence. The strongest ruled the weakest obeyed. You didn't dream of a future, you dreamt of surviving the weak. You didn't live, you lasted. When you finally sat down, you were either too weak or too hurt. Joy was rare, but it existed in firelight stories. Your gods were cruel, but better than nothing. You feared the wind, and for good reason. You didn't choose your fate, it was carved to go. Your first tool was your last hope. You were born into a nightmare and called it life. You weren't human, as we know it, but you were the beginning. You didn't leave much behind except survival itself. And somehow, against every odd, you lived, because your pain became our history, and your suffering became our origin story. Civilization was rising, but so was suffering. You were born into a class system you'd never escape. If you were a slave, your life belonged to someone else. You woke before the sun and worked until your bones screamed. If you disobeyed, you were whipped, or worse. Your body was property. Your name barely mattered. You built monuments you'd never see completed. The pyramids were graves, sometimes yours. You hold stones heavier than your own despair. You didn't ask why, you just obeyed. If you were royalty, your enemies plotted your downfall. Poison wasn't rare, it was strategy. If you were poor, you lived in filth. Your streets were rivers of sewage and sorrow. Rats shared your food and your diseases. If war came, it came to your doorstep. Cities were burned to the ground in hours. Soldiers didn't spare the weak, they started with them. Your gods demanded sacrifice, sometimes human. You watched your friends vanish on altars. If you were chosen, you weren't lucky, you were doomed. Priests told you your suffering pleased the gods. You believed it, because not believing was dangerous. Writing was rare, and most couldn't read. Knowledge was locked behind power. Education belonged to the elite. You were born to farm, fight, or fade. Fields were endless, the sun unforgiving. You harvested grain but never saw gold. Tax collectors arrived with soldiers. If you couldn't pay, your family was taken. War didn't ask for your opinion. You were drafted without choice. Shields were wooden, swords were rusted. You died for kings you'd never meet. If you returned, no one remembered your name. Medicine was bloodletting and leeches. Surgery was done with knives and no anesthesia. Screams were normal in healing halls. Plagues spread faster than rumors. You didn't know what infection was. only that it killed. Death came in fevers, boils, and night sweats. Healers guessed more than they cured. Pregnant women often died with their babies. Children didn't survive their first winters. Grief was constant, names were given and forgotten. Your diet was bread, beer, and desperation. Hunger never left your table. Religion ruled every decision. You worshipped out of fear, not faith. The stars were signs, not science. Eclipses were omens of death. You believed everything could be cursed. And often, it felt like you were. Justice was harsh, public, and brutal. Thieves lost hands. Accused witches burned. Courts favored the rich. Prisons were pits of disease and madness. Love was rarely romantic. It was arranged or forbidden. Women had no say in marriage. Children were bartered as alliances. You could be married before you hit puberty. There was no privacy. Your business was the village's business. Clean water was a miracle. Baths were shared, and diseases multiplied. You smelled like smoke, sweat, and survival. Your teeth rotted in your 20s. You smiled rarely, and when you did, it hurt. Wars raged for gods, land, and egos. Maps didn't exist, only borders drawn in blood. Travelers vanished in deserts, jungles, or the sea. If you left home, you might never return, and sometimes that was mercy. Empires rose and fell, but people always suffered. One king's glory was 1,000 peasants' graves. Art was beautiful but often made from tragedy. You died for beauty, for belief, for nothing. History remembered heroes but forgot victims. Your name wasn't carved into stone, it was lost to time. You watched pyramids rise and friends fall. You lived under tyranny and called it order. Peace was temporary. Famine always followed. Every gain brought a greater cost, and even gods couldn't protect you. But still you endured, because that's what humans did. Every pain you bore paved the way for someone else, and though history forgot your name, it was written in your scars. The castle walls looked mighty, but they weren't built for you. You were born in a wooden hut, not a stone fortress. Cold air slipped through every crack in your home. You slept on hay that scratched and itched. Fleas and rats were your nightly visitors. You wore the same tunic for months. Bathing was a luxury you couldn't afford. You reeked, but so did everyone else. Your village was quiet until raiders came. If they took your crops, you starved. If they took your family, you screamed. And no one came to help. War was a season like winter, always returning. Knights fought for glory. You fought to survive. Arrows rained from the sky without warning. Swords crushed skulls like Milans who were told your lord protected you. But when the enemy came, he ran first. Religion wasn't a choice, it was law. The church told you what to believe, eat, and fear. Priests were judges, executioners, and landlords. If you questioned, you were damned or burned. Books were chained to altars. Knowledge was guarded like treasure. You could live your whole life without learning to read. Superstition ruled your thoughts. A bad harvest meant God was angry. A comet meant the devil was near. A black cat meant your neighbor was a witch. Witch hunts were real and deadly. If the crops failed, someone had to blame. Women were dragged from homes and drowned. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent and dead. The plague didn't knock, it crashed in. One sneeze could kill your whole family. Boils covered your skin like cursed grapes. You died in days alone, and bodies were tossed into mass graves. You buried your child, then your wife, then yourself. The doctor wore a beaked mask and carried no hope. You prayed, but even priests died. The church rang bells for the dead all day. Hope rotted with the corpses. If you were lucky, you were born into a trade. But lucky meant you worked every day of your life. Your hands were blistered by age 10. You made shoes you couldn't afford. You forged tools, but couldn't buy bread. Winter came like a curse. Firewood ran out before February. You watched your breath fog over your soup. If you got sick, there was no medicine. A simple cold could turn fatal. Death didn't knock, it sat at your table. Your children were your only comfort, but most of them didn't reach adulthood. You gave them names and then gave them back to the earth. Marriage was survival, not love. Women were wed by 14, men died by 40, widows were expected to remarry by spring. The church said your suffering was holy. Your life was a test you didn't ask to take. Heaven was promised but never proven. You paid tithes while starving. The bishop feasted as your stomach growled. Your dreams were small peace, food, and warmth. Even those were rare. Nobles hunted for sport in your woods. If you hunted for food, you were hanged. Your lord collected taxes for the king and kept half. His castle glowed at night while yours froze. Justice was delivered in stocks and lashings. The town square was both market and execution stage. You watched neighbors lose tongues for gossip. Thieves lost fingers. Traitors lost heads. You didn't speak loudly, you whispered to survive. Love poems were written, but not for you. Romance was for the rich. You recited prayers instead of poetry. You envied the merchant's horse and the monk's wine. You dreamed in silence and shadows, but even then you endured. You tilled the earth that kings walked on. You raised children who built cathedrals. Your bones built the world. You were forgotten by history, but you were the reason it moved. And that's why the medieval world was the worst time to be born as a human. You were born in smoke, not sunlight. The city sky was a dirty shade of gray. Factories roared louder than thunder. Soot blackened your lungs by age 5. Your cradle rocked between machines. Childhood ended the day you walked. You didn't learn letters, you learned letters. Your first job paid in coins that couldn't buy bread. You worked 14 hours, 6 days a week. Your boss timed your bathroom breaks. If you slowed down, you were whipped or fired. You weren't old enough for school, but old enough to die in a machine. Fingers, arms, and legs were lost daily. Screams echoed louder than steam whistles. Accidents weren't news, they were routine. You didn't have shoes, you had blisters. The floor was wet and cold every day. You fell asleep standing up. You shared one bed with 4 siblings. And sometimes, one blanket. Your father coughed blood into rags. Your mother worked as a washerwoman for pennies. Soap burned her hands. Raw. Your house was one room. No windows. The toilet was a bucket, emptied into the alley. Rats lived in your walls. You heard them chew at night. Your street stank of sewage and sickness. Children died from diarrhea and fever. You didn't cry when your baby brother died, you were used to it. Rich folks called it progress. They drank tea while your stomach howled. You saw carriages with golden handles. You pulled wagons with broken wheels. Rich kids played with toys. You played with coal. When a new machine came, you prayed it wouldn't replace you. But it always did. You protested and were arrested. Police beat workers with clubs. You spoke and lost your job. You stayed silent and lost your dignity. Your dream wasn't wealth, it was rest. Sundays were your only freedom. Church was hope and guilt at the same time. The priest told you to be grateful. For what? For life inside a machine. For the cough that never went away. For losing your friends to fires and fumes. Even children marched in protests. They shouted in the streets with tiny fists. But no one listened. Your sister died in a textile fire. The factory owner blamed her dress. You blamed him and the locked door. You lit a candle and kept working. School was for the wealthy. You've taught yourself with torn newspapers. You've dreamed by lantern light. You watched trains thunder by. They stole farmland and gave smoke. You missed green hills you'd never seen. Farms became factories. Animals disappeared. You called pigeons birds. Because that's all you saw. You tasted metal in your mouth. You smelled coal in your hair. You breathed fire without knowing it. You fought wars you didn't understand. You were told it was for your country. You didn't even own your country. A king lived in a palace while you shared soup. A banker made your month's wage in a day. You didn't envy them, you couldn't imagine them. Your hope was a better job, not a better life. Some ran away. Others jumped into rivers. You stayed because you had siblings to feed. And maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would be kinder. One day machines broke down, and you rested for a minute. Then you were ordered to clean the gears. You did, with your bare hands. The grease never left your skin. It sank deep like the hunger. When you died, your name wasn't recorded, but your labor built the modern world. Your bones built the bridges. Your sweat powered the future. And that's why the Industrial Revolution was one of the worst times to be born as a human. You were born in a digital world. Screens replaced playgrounds. Your first smile was captured by a smartphone. Your first word was a voice command. You learned to swipe before you could walk. Likes became love. Followers replaced real friends. You grew up comparing yourself to filters. Reality never looked good enough. You saw war from a life. You saw death in high resolution. You laughed at memes and cried alone. Your school had bullet drills. Your classroom had locked doors. You checked social media more than your heartbeat. You were told to be yourself, then sold a version of it. You scrolled until your thumbs hurt. You clicked I agree without reading anything. Your privacy was a product. You had access to the world but were more alone than ever. You feared missing out, even while doing nothing. Every day felt urgent. Notifications ruled your brain. Sleep came with blue light. You were tired before you hit your teens. You were anxious by default. You were medicated by middle school. You feared the future and hated the present. You chased degrees that led to debt. You owed money before you earned it. You studied for jobs that didn't exist. You applied for 200 jobs, got 2 replies. Rent was more than your paycheck. You lived with your parents longer than you wanted. Your dream was owning a house like your grandparents did. That dream died quietly. You couldn't afford to be sick. Insurance cost more than groceries. You skipped the doctor and hoped. The news made you numb. Politicians argued while the planet burned. You recycled, corporations polluted. You ate fake meat from plastic trays. Water came in bottles that outlived you. Every month broke a climate record. You watched floods on TikTok. You watched forests die on Instagram. You saw billionaires go to space for fun. You couldn't afford a bus ticket. You felt powerless and were told to vote. Your vote was drowned in money. Your opinion was dated to be sold. Ads knew you better than your family. You learned more from YouTube than school. You were told you could be anything, then told you weren't enough. You chased side hustles. You've burned out before 30. Your dreams became content. Your hobbies became monetized. You performed for strangers. You forgot how to just be. You feared silence. You feared being forgotten. You feared being cancelled. You lived online but died offline. You were more productive but less fulfilled. You traveled the world through screens. You feared missing calls more than missing joy. You smiled for selfies, not memories. You prayed to go viral. You were told to hustle harder. Rest became weakness. Mental health was a hashtag. You told strangers you were okay. You didn't believe it. You feared AI would take your job. Then you feared it would take your art. Then your thoughts. And still, you kept scrolling. You gave birth with a phone in hand. You grieved through texts. You broke up through DMs. You forgot how to look someone in the eyes. You forgot how to breathe without music. You forgot how to just be bored. You lived faster, felt less. You achieved more, enjoyed less. And somehow, you still hoped, because despite everything, being human still means you care.